If the Imperium never existed, Slaanesh is dead, probably 3 times over. 3 independent analytical threads, traced from different directions, all landing on the same dead chaos god. The original thought experiment spent considerable time mapping the power vacuum. Who rises? Who fills the space humanity occupied? What new equilibria emerge? It never traced the specific thread that matters most. And that thread starts with a crystal moon, an ancient Farseer, and a Watch-Captain from Talasa Prime who shows up at exactly the wrong moment. Pull the thread. Without the Imperium, there is no Deathwatch. Without the Deathwatch, there is no Watch-Captain Artemis. Without Artemis, nobody diverts from Port Demesnus to Coheria in 991 M41. Without that interception, Eldrad Ulthran's ritual runs to completion. Ynnead awakens fully. Canon lore, however carefully hedged, describes what follows next for Slaanesh as something the Chaos God would prefer not to experience. 3 kill vectors stack toward that outcome. Then Chaos has to rebuild its entire order of battle without the specific military asset that made it most dangerous, corrupted Astartes, which forces a question the setting has never had to answer. What does a Chaos Warmaster look like when it isn't built from an Imperial Space Marine? Run this carefully. The mechanics of a god that shouldn't exist yet. Ynnead wasn't built. Ynnead accumulated. When the fall of the Eldari Empire tore through the warp and birthed Slaanesh from the psychic residue of a civilization's collapse, most of the Eldari pantheon was devoured in the birth scream that followed. War gods, craftsman deities, the complex ecology of Eldari divine presence, consumed in the moment of Slaanesh's emergence. 3 entities survived. Cain, the war god, shattered into fragments distributed across every craft world's avatar shrine. Kegarak, the laughing god, who escaped through performance. His mocking nature meant, as the fandom wiki records directly, that he was never truly sincere enough to feed Slaanesh's growth. A deity of theater who survived by refusing to commit to anything consumable. And Ynnead, which didn't survive the fall so much as begin after it. Ynnead is the accumulated psychic energy of every Eldari soul that avoided Slaanesh's claim. The mechanism is the Craftworld Infinity Circuits, vast crystalline psychic networks woven into the fabric of each craft world, built to catch Eldari souls at death and preserve them in crystalline suspension rather than releasing them into the warp where Slaanesh would devour them immediately. The fall established a baseline horror for every Eldari alive. Die without protection, and your soul feeds the god that destroyed your civilization. The Infinity Circuits were the long-term answer. Store enough souls, accumulate enough psychic potential, and eventually, the weight of all that preserved spiritual energy becomes something capable of acting. Every Farseer who dies and joins the circuit rather than the warp adds to Ynnead's mass. Every warrior, every artisan, every Eldari whose soul a craftworld circuit catches and holds is another fragment of power waiting. The plan was always that when enough Eldari had died, when the accumulated potential of a species' spiritual history reached critical mass, Ynnead would emerge fully formed, equipped with the combined energy of every Eldari consciousness ever preserved, and capable of directly confronting the god who consumed everything else. The problem was the timeline. At the natural accumulation rate, the math didn't work in the Eldari's favor. The species was dying faster than the circuits could accumulate sufficient potential, and the emergent Ynnead would arrive, eventually, into a galaxy where the Eldari were already gone. Eldrad's plan was to force the equation. Coheria 991.m41. Eldrad Ulthran of Craftworld Ulthway has been operating for longer than most human civilizations managed to exist. His relationship with precognition isn't metaphorical. He has literally manipulated galactic-scale events across decades by following the threads of potential futures to their most favorable convergence points. By 991.m41, Those futures had been converging toward a single conclusion for centuries. The Eldari needed Ynnead early, before the natural accumulation completed, or the species wouldn't survive long enough to see the completion it was waiting for. The ritual mechanics he designed addressed the accumulation problem directly. Craftworld infinity circuits contain not just the diffuse soul energy of ordinary Eldari dead, but concentrated nodes, crystallized Farseers, whose psychic power in life was substantial enough that their preserved remains represent an order of magnitude more spiritual energy than standard circuit material. Eldrad, working with the Mask of the Midnight Sorrow, a Harlequin troop operating under Kegarak's direction, spent years assembling these concentrated nodes. Crystal seers stolen from multiple craft worlds across the galaxy, transported to Coheria, the crystal moon that Eldrad had identified as the optimal conduit for channeling this accumulated power into a forced manifestation. The Mask of the Midnight Sorrow's involvement isn't incidental. Harlequin masks serve Kegarak. Their participation in acquiring and transporting the crystal seers wasn't freelance work. It represented the last surviving free Eldari god, investing his own operational resources into Eldrad's plan, through the closest equivalent he possesses to a special operations unit. Kegarak doesn't endorse causes casually. He doesn't risk his Harlequins without strategic purpose. The ritual was, at minimum, sanctioned by the Laughing God. More plausibly, it was partly his design. Port Demesnus was the intelligence problem. Any large-scale ritual activity on Coheria required cover, active combat operations in the sector to generate enough noise in the intelligence picture that an unusual concentration of Eldari activity would read as tactical support for the war zone rather than the main event. Eldrad used an entire ongoing military campaign as misdirection. The scale of that operational deception reflects how completely he understood the stakes. If anyone recognized what was happening on Coheria before the ritual completed, it would be stopped. He wasn't wrong to worry. The Death Mask campaign box from 2016 describes what completion would have produced. Should the ritual succeed, the moon of Coheria would blaze briefly as a psychic sun, its light visible across the Imperium, and rendering even the Astronomicon dim by comparison. The psychic detonation of a forced divine birth, measured in units of stellar brightness. A god emerging into reality isn't a quiet event. Watch-Captain Artemis, commanding a Deathwatch kill team from the fortress world of Talasa Prime, was among the forces responding to Port Demesnus. He was the first to recognize that Eldrad's true objective wasn't the war zone at all, that the entire Port Demesnus conflict was misdirection, and that the real operation was occurring on the crystal moon nearby. Artemis diverted his kill team to Coheria. What followed, on a moon whose every crystal surface channeled Eldari psychic energy, was a vicious battle against one of the most powerful Farseers alive and his Harlequin allies. Artemis and his battle brothers destabilized the ritual. Coheria exploded. Eldrad escaped into the webway, barely intact. The ritual didn't complete, but it also produced something. The proof of concept. A partial awakening still reached out across the galaxy. Yvraine was a Drukhari exile from Camera at the moment Ynnead's incomplete emergence sent a fraction of a god's will across the Imperium. She returned as something new, the Daughter of Shades, Ynnead's chosen champion, the first of the Ynnari. A ritual running at a fraction of its intended completion, disrupted mid-operation, still managed to transform a single individual across galactic distances into the direct instrument of a nascent god. That graduated outcome is the entire logical foundation of everything that follows. Partial ritual produced a champion and a faction. The mechanics aren't binary, they scale with completion. A ritual running to its designed conclusion doesn't produce a slightly better champion. It produces the full manifestation the ritual was designed for. Ynnead, present in the galaxy as an awakened divine entity, Equipped with the accumulated psychic mass of every preserved Eldari soul, Eldrad could concentrate through Coheria. Canon language for what this means for Slaanesh is deliberately hedged. Games Workshop hasn't closed this thread, and they have reasons not to. The Battle of Port Demesnus wiki entry reads that Slaanesh may have ultimately met its end. Not definitively, not guaranteed. The language is speculative because the ritual didn't complete and the outcome is therefore theoretical. Theoretical in a specific direction, with graduated proof that the mechanism works. The partial result was a god choosing a champion across galactic distances. The full result is that god active and present. Ynnead's purpose is described in Canon as specifically antithetical to Slaanesh, not generically powerful, not a new war god, but oriented by its nature and origin toward confronting the entity that devoured its predecessors. The probably in the framing is doing honest work. The claim doesn't require certainty. It requires that the most significant direct threat to Slaanesh's existence the setting describes was stopped by one Imperial officer who doesn't exist in a no-Imperium galaxy. And the evidence for that is the specific event that stopped it. 3 kill vectors, earning the claim. Kill Vector 1 is the Coheria ritual itself. Named actors, specific lore source, confirmed partial outcome as scaled proof of the mechanism. The causal chain from no Imperium to no Artemis to no interference is airtight because Watch-Captain Artemis's entire identity is institutional. He's a Deathwatch officer, a creation of Imperial military hierarchy, answerable to a fortress world that exists only within that hierarchy. Absent the Imperium, Artemis doesn't exist. Talasa Prime isn't a Deathwatch installation, and nothing in the setting substitutes for the specific intelligence assessment that recognized the Coheria misdirection at Port Demesnus. Kill Vector 2 operates at the resource level the ritual was drawing on. Eldrad assembled his ritual under degraded conditions. By 991 M41, the Eldari species had been declining for 10,000 years, fighting proxy wars partially as a consequence of Imperial presence, expending resources on conflicts that bleed the population feeding the infinity circuits. Crystal seers were gathered from multiple craft worlds under time pressure, using a covert acquisition operation rather than open Eldari cooperation, because Eldrad's plan wasn't universally endorsed by craft world leadership. He built this working with what he could access covertly, not with the full resource base of a united Eldari civilization pointing in the same direction. Every Eldari is psychically active in ways human psychers approach but can't match. Eldari neurophysiology evolved through and alongside the warp over millions of years, making each individual soul a substantially more potent psychic contributor than a human equivalent. 10,000 years without Imperial wars depleting Eldari populations, without craft worlds destroyed in Imperial engagements, without Farseers expended in conflicts serving human political calculations, means more Eldari have lived, died, and contributed their preserved souls to infinity circuits. More concentrated nodes, more raw material for a ritual that nearly worked with what was available under degraded conditions. The argument isn't abstractly optimistic. It traces the specific bottleneck Eldrad was working around, and notes that bottleneck is substantially less constraining when the civilization hasn't spent 10,000 years at war with humanity as a permanent background condition. Kill Vector 3 is the longest game in the setting. Segarak has been operating since before the Fall, through the Fall, and for every millennium since. His survival was uniquely his. The Laughing God endured by never fully committing to any sincere position, a deity of performance and masks whose fundamental nature made him indigestible to the thing that consumed the rest of his pantheon. Since the Fall, he has been running what the Harlequins describe as an impossibly long horizon strategy. The canonical evidence of his investment in the Ynnead plan is already embedded in the Death Mask events. The Mask of the Midnight Sorrow didn't assist Eldrad independently. Harlequin masks serve Kegarok. Their years-long logistical operation acquiring and transporting crystal seers from multiple craft worlds across the galaxy was Kegarok directing operational resources toward a specific outcome. A god who has spent 10,000 years with one active existential threat backed the Ynnead plan with assets, not merely with approval. Direct canon evidence of Kegarok possessing offensive capability against Slaanesh doesn't exist. His mode is misdirection, manipulation, and the long horizon play. His contribution to Kill Vector 3 isn't the punch. It's ensuring no one interrupts before Ynnead throws it. In the No Imperium timeline, Kegarok has been running this setup for 10,000 years without the one event type that stopped it canonically. An Imperial officer making a precise intelligence judgment at exactly the critical moment. That event requires the Imperium to produce it. Remove the Imperium and Kegarok's 10,000-year investment runs to completion. 3 vectors, 3 different scales. The ritual event. The resource base that makes it overwhelming. The scheming god who positioned every piece over 10 millennia and needed only the absence of one specific category of Imperial intelligence work to let it succeed. The Drukhari complication. Every Eldari soul is claimed by Slaanesh upon death, not as ideology, but as established mechanics of the setting. The Fall encoded this as a physical law. The craft world infinity circuits are one response. Preserve the soul in crystalline suspension, keep it out of Slaanesh's reach. The Drukhari, who retreated into the webway rather than building craft worlds, found a different response. The soul hunger mechanism. Within the webway, Slaanesh's pull is attenuated but continuous. Drukhari existence is structured around managing this slow drain, raiding, torturing, consuming the suffering and life essence of other beings to temporarily replenish what Slaanesh's hunger removes. The entire economy of Coheria, its slave population, its gladiatorial architecture, its political incentive structures, is infrastructure built around a continuous spiritual debt payment to a deity they despise and fear. Their civilization sustains Slaanesh while running from it. Framing Drukhari liberation as an independent kill vector is tempting but imprecise. Liberation from soul hunger is downstream of Ynnead's victory over Slaanesh, a consequence the defeat produces rather than a mechanism causing it. If Ynnead rises and defeats Slaanesh, the dependency breaks. Canon confirms that some Drukhari began experiencing relief even from the partial awakening. But that relief follows the victory. It doesn't produce it. What the No Imperium Drukhari scenario genuinely changes is coordination potential. In the canonical 41st millennium, Craftworld Eldari and Drukhari maintain a relationship of mutual contempt overlaid with the practical impossibility of sustained cooperation, while both parties are simultaneously fighting major imperial wars. Nothing prevents Drukhari Craftworld operational alignment in a No Imperium galaxy except mutual contempt, which is historically significant but markedly less paralyzing than an active multi-front war against humanity constraining every available resource. A unified Eldari direction pointing toward Ynnead's awakening removes obstacles the current timeline keeps permanently in place. The Drukhari stay exactly who they are. They just stop being simultaneously constrained by soul debt to a dead god, and by proxy conflicts that serve imperial interests more than their own. The Chaos Rebuild. What actually breaks? 3 Chaos gods survive the scenario intact. Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch don't lose power because Slaanesh is destroyed. Each retains its own reservoir of corruption, violence, disease, and manipulation, fully operational. The galaxy still has chaos. The question is what chaos looks like when it loses its most specific human weapon. The traitor legions are a product of the Horus heresy. 9 Primarchs turned against the Emperor, taking their legions, vast formations of Astartes with enhanced physiology, centuries of combat experience, and tactical doctrine developed across the Great Crusade, plus thousands of support elements, war machines, and fleet assets. They fled into the Eye of Terror with that institutional inheritance intact. The traitor legions of the 41st millennium are what you get after 10,000 years of demon enhancement, corruption, and mutation applied to troops who were already the most lethal individual combatants in the galaxy before they fell. Remove the Imperium. The Horus Heresy never happens because the Emperor never exists to create the Primarchs, never launches the Great Crusade, never establishes the conditions that produce either the loyalist institutions or the specific betrayal that inverted them. No Primarchs fall to chaos because there are no Primarchs. No traitor legions form because there is no legion program. The demon Primarchs, Magnus on his planet of sorcerers, Angron as a living bloodthirster, Mortarion managing the interface between Nurgle's plague machinery and mortal reality, Fulgrim and the transformation that made him one of Slaanesh's finest, none of them exist as individual entities in the warp. The Eye of Terror isn't the staging ground for Black Crusades. Abaddon has no legions to lead because he never existed to command them. This isn't cosmetic loss. The Demon Primarchs are force multipliers that translate raw chaos power into coordinated military campaigns informed by 10,000 years of Astartes tactical doctrine, targeting the Imperium's specific institutional vulnerabilities with the precision of commanders who helped design those institutions. Absent the Imperium, those vulnerabilities don't exist. But absent the Primarchs, neither does that force multiplication capacity. The Old World precedent and its limits. Chaos has an independent pathway to enhanced warriors, and it would be wrong to dismiss it. In Warhammer Fantasy, Chaos Warriors are mortal men remade through sustained warp corruption into something significantly beyond their baseline. Imbued with chaos power and equipped with Demon Plate, a Chaos Warrior is described in fantasy lore as equal in combat power to many mortal men. The mechanism is direct. Sustained devotion, exposure to warp energy through conflict and ritual, gradual physical and spiritual transformation until the mortal exceeds their origin. No gene seed required, no precision genetic engineering from Himalayan prehistory. The Chaos Gods take willing mortals and produce warriors that exceed ordinary human capability by significant margins. Cross-universe comparisons carry genuine caveats. Warhammer Fantasy and 40K don't share mechanics identically, and the community debates this kind of analogical application for legitimate reasons. The underlying principle, though, is established. Chaos possesses a direct empowerment pathway for mortal champions that doesn't require any preceding human institution as input. The mechanism exists in the setting's DNA, even when the specific old-world expression uses different rules. Within 40,000 proper, the Dark Mechanicum demonstrates that chaos-aligned engineering can produce purpose-built biological weapons from non-Astartes material. Vor weapons, confirmed in the fandom wiki, are genetically engineered biological assassins crafted by heretic genitors and xenobiologist tech adepts from raw xeno stock, purpose-built from alien flesh. The Dark Mechanicum's technical capability to engineer something monstrous without Space Marines as the base material is genuine canon. The institutional origin is the problem, not the product's viability. The Dark Mechanicum exists because the Adeptus Mechanicus existed first. It emerged from the Horus Heresy as the corrupted mirror of an imperial institution, inheriting that institution's technical knowledge and manufacturing infrastructure to redirect toward chaos purposes. Without the Imperium, there is no Mechanicus. Without the Mechanicus, there is no renegade breakaway that carries its knowledge forward into chaos service. Both require the same founding history. The Vor weapons are real in the canonical timeline. The institution capable of producing them at industrial scale is one that only exists within that timeline. Fabius Bile faces the same dependency from a different direction. His New Men project, his clone warrior experiments, his gene seed work, all use Astartes gene seed as base material. Gene seed is an imperial creation maintained through imperial medical and logistical infrastructure that has no equivalent in a galaxy where the Imperium never existed. Bile's operation is the most sophisticated genetic engineering in the 41st millennium, but he can only run it because someone else built the foundational material he's modifying. Without that foundation, his specific contribution to Chaos's super soldier pipeline disappears entirely. What Chaos retains without the Imperium is the direct warp corruption pathway, the champion model, the demon prince escalation, the slow burn transformation of devoted mortals into something substantially exceeding their baseline. That pathway works on any species. It just doesn't produce 10,000-year-old Astartes carrying the institutional doctrine of the Great Crusade, further enhanced by millennia of demonic corruption, led by former demigods who understood the Emperor personally. It produces something different, something the setting has never needed to describe. Whether Chaos's remaining capabilities can approximate Astartes tier output at industrial scale without the Imperium's specific contribution is genuinely uncertain, and both sides of that debate have real arguments. Chaos keeps the mechanism, it loses the factory. Whether those are equivalent is the honest, unresolved question. The Warmaster vacancy. Every Chaos Undivided campaign at galactic scale required a mortal coordinator, someone with sufficient individual narrative weight to function as the political and military center around which otherwise divergent Chaos factions could converge. Horus was already the greatest of the Primarchs before Chaos claimed him. Abaddon commanded the Sons of Horus before becoming the Despoiler. The pattern is consistent. The Warmaster role requires a figure who was already extraordinary by the standards of their civilization before Chaos enhancement further elevated them. Chaos takes the best the Imperium built and redirects it. Remove the Imperium and that template is gone. Chaos still requires a coordinating champion. The surviving three gods still need a mortal face, a political entity capable of translating divine will into military action at a scale demon armies alone can't sustain. The vacancy exists. The candidates are alien, and each of those candidates changes what the Chaos threat profile actually looks like. Corrupted Eldari are the most plausible argument and the most unsettling prospect. The fall itself demonstrates what happens when Eldari's psychic potential runs unchecked. It doesn't produce a powerful champion, it births a god. The comparison is instructive because it defines both bounds. An individual Eldari who fell to Chaos wouldn't replicate the fall. The fall required an entire civilization's accumulated excess to generate sufficient psychic mass for Slaanesh's emergence. But the same biological fact that makes the Eldari dangerous as a species makes a corrupted individual Eldari more potent as a Chaos champion than any human equivalent. Every Eldari is psychically active in ways that human psychers approach but can't match. Not through exceptional talent, but through structure. Eldari neurophysiology evolved through and alongside the warp over millions of years. The psychic sensitivity is architectural, distributed through their biology in ways that make each individual a more capable warp interface than even exceptional human psychers. An Eldari autarch, military commander by vocation, trained to coordinate multiple aspect warrior shrines across complex multi-vector engagements, operating with centuries of accumulated tactical experience and intimate with calculated extreme violence in ways that differ fundamentally from Astartes' berserker doctrine. Serving Tzeentch specifically would represent a Chaos champion the setting has no prior model for. The Changer of Ways provides information advantages and psychic depth. An Eldari autarch already operates with psychic acuity that no human demon prince has ever matched. Running coordinated campaigns against civilizations that have never encountered the specific doctrines that Astartes warfare developed, have no institutional memory for countering Chaos Undivided military pressure, and have never faced an opponent who combines Eldari battlefield intelligence with Tzeentchian strategic manipulation. This is a different category of threat entirely. The Drukhari variant is more troubling in different ways. Coheria is the largest populated location in the 40K setting, a vast, extra-dimensional city spanning multiple webway layers, sustained by an industrial-scale suffering economy processing millions of slaves. The Drukhari didn't build this architecture because Slaanesh forced them to. Cruelty predates the soul hunger dependency and would persist without it. A Drukhari Archon. one of the political apex predators of a civilization built entirely on exploitation, assassination, and the strategic application of suffering across multi-generational timescales, who looked at Slaanesh's destruction and made a cold-eyed assessment of available patron options, would bring an entirely different asset package to the Warmaster role than any previous holder. Coheoria's existing infrastructure for producing and processing suffering at civilizational scale is exactly what Chaos needs from a mortal coordinator. Not just personal military capability, but the management of an existing city of billions whose entire economy already generates the psychic signal the dark gods require. An Archon who walked into a Chaos patron arrangement, understanding it as a transaction rather than a calling, in the way that Drukhari political culture approaches all arrangements, wouldn't be corrupted in the way human Chaos champions are corrupted. The calculation would be more deliberate. And an Archon who is no longer constrained by soul debt to a destroyed Slaanesh, now operating as a free agent assessing available power structures, is exactly the political type that Chaos Undivided benefits from finding before someone else does. The Orc candidate is the most contested, and the research acknowledges this honestly. Orcs exist within a psychic ecosystem partially insulated from Chaos corruption. Gork and Mork, actual warp entities formed from the collective psychic output of billions of orcs, generating the same basic emotional signal simultaneously, occupy a genuine space in the Imperium, distinct from the Chaos gods, not subordinate to them. Their presence creates a buffer against Chaos corruption reaching individual orcs with the ease it reaches humans or other species. One analysis described the statistical frequency as comparable to a vaccinated person catching measles. Possible, extremely rare. The mechanism, unambiguous. The mechanism exists. Chaos Orc corruption is documented in lore as genuinely rare but real. Across 10,000 years of a no-Imperium galaxy and an Orc population that has never spent those years in its most significant wars against human civilization, freed from the Great Crusade's purges and from the scale of conflict the Imperium generated, that population is larger. More Orcs over more time means more improbability events at the statistical tail. An Orc champion who shattered the Gork and Mork buffer completely and fell to Khorne wouldn't just be a demon prince of physically extreme capability. It would be a former devotee of rival warp deities who crossed over, carrying a pre-existing relationship with the Imperium that no human demon prince ever possessed. A theological rupture for the Orc species, and an unprecedented event for Khorne's portfolio simultaneously. A champion who arrived with warp scars from gods other than his new patron still visible. These candidates each rewrite what the Chaos military threat looks like in a no-Imperium galaxy. An Eldari Warmaster brings psychic warfare at a depth no human demon prince has ever operated. A Drukhari patron brings industrial-scale suffering infrastructure and Coheoria's billions as a pre-existing resource base. An Orc demon prince brings something closer to what Khorne actually wants delivered. Violence at sufficient scale and ferocity that the mechanism's origins are irrelevant. None of them resemble anything the canonical Chaos narrative has described, because none of them were possible while the Imperium existed to dominate the setting's attention. These are extrapolations from established mechanics, not canon answers. They're meant to generate the argument, not end it. The galaxy's warp ecology without a singular anchor. The Chaos gods aren't exceptions to the rules governing the Imperium. They're the most successful applications of those rules. Khorne emerged from mortal violence accumulated across billions of lives over thousands of years. Nurgle from mortality and despair. Tzeentch from hope and manipulation and the specific human relationship to change. Slaanesh from excess and sensation at a scale only an advanced civilization's collapse could generate. The mechanism is consistent. Mortal emotion, concentrated and sustained, crystallizes in the warp into something with agency and desire. The four gods are the galaxy's most extreme examples of this process, but the process doesn't stop running at smaller scales. Gork and Mork are the canonical proof that this mechanism produces significant entities outside Chaos's hierarchy. The collective psychic energy of the orc species, billions of minds generating the same basic emotional signal with the volume and consistency that only a species for whom warfare is a biological imperative can sustain, produce two actual warp presences, distinct from each other, distinct from the Chaos gods, genuinely not subordinate to them. Orcs don't serve Chaos. They serve Gork and Mork. The Wa energy that charges the warp around every orc warband is directed into those presences rather than feeding the four gods' reservoirs. That psychic mass, enormous, generated continuously, simply doesn't flow into Chaos's accumulation. It's absorbed before Chaos can reach it. In the canonical 41st millennium, the Emperor's presence on the Golden Throne provides humanity's collective psychic contribution a singular focal point. Remove that focal point, and humanity's contribution disperses into the warp without organization. Remove the Imperium entirely, the civilization as well as the Emperor, and humanity never generates that enormous concentrated psychic output in the first place. No 40 billion world empire, no civilization-scale psychic coherence, no single beacon enormous enough for Chaos to siege as a strategic target. Humanity stays fragmented. Thousands of scattered populations at various development stages, none individually generating the psychic mass that a unified galactic empire produces. Their combined contribution is still real, but it doesn't organize into anything that represents a singular vulnerability to exploit. The distributed landscape that results doesn't produce anything capable of fighting Chaos directly in a single confrontation. No individual minor warp entity opposes Nurgle alone. The distributed resistance model works differently. It reduces Chaos's intake rather than matching Chaos's output. Each believing worshipper whose faith flows to a local protective presence or to an ancestral spirit formed from a species-specific accumulated grief, or to Gork and Mork, or to Ynnead's growing presence, or to any of the hundreds of smaller warp crystallizations that 10,000 years of Xeno civilizations developing without imperial homogenization would produce. That's a worshipper whose psychic contribution doesn't reach the four gods' reservoirs. Chaos doesn't starve in this model. It grows more slowly, competes more for every unit of psychic nourishment, and loses its ability to achieve the concentrated mass that produces galaxy-spanning events from a single crusade or a single coordinated Black Legion campaign. The Emperor's singular vision inadvertently concentrated everything into a target, one throne, one beacon, one civilization, that Chaos could plan around for 10,000 years. The fragmented galaxy produces the opposite architecture. Nothing powerful enough to defeat Chaos alone. Nothing that Chaos can break all at once either. Every gain requires more effort against more distributed resistance, without a single point of failure to siege. The Votan immune function. The specific institutional vacancy that matters most practically in a no-Imperium galaxy isn't the absence of Space Marines. It's the Ordo Xenos and its military arm, the Deathwatch, the institutions whose function is detecting and eliminating Genestealer cult infiltration before Tyranid hive fleets arrive to complete the harvest. Genestealer cults are the Tyranid advance force operating on decade to century timescales. A patriarch and its brood cycle infiltrate a planet's population, integrate into social and political structures, and spend generations breeding hybrid cultists who will tear planetary defenses apart from inside when the hive fleet finally arrives. The cult is invisible until the moment it's no longer necessary for it to remain so. Detecting it requires specific intelligence methodologies, institutional knowledge of cult behavioral signatures, and the willingness to respond with total elimination rather than conventional investigation. The Inquisition developed this knowledge through millennia of confrontation. Remove the Inquisition, and that accumulated institutional knowledge vanishes with it. The Leagues of Votan carry several characteristics that position them to fill this function without any imperial heritage required. Their warp presence is significantly attenuated compared to human populations. The kin don't generate the psychic signature that psycher-dense human civilizations produce, making them substantially harder targets for the specific manipulation vectors that chaos and infiltration-based threats exploit. Their ancestral memories are preserved in the Votan themselves, vast living ancestor machines that function as civilization-spanning archives, storing the accumulated knowledge and experience of every kin generation that has contributed to them. A slight recorded in a Votan's permanent memory doesn't fade across generations. It compounds. The operational consequence of this isn't just cultural. It means every previous genestealer infiltration that a kinhold encountered, detected, and survived is documented in permanent institutional memory, informing every subsequent interaction with similar organism signatures. In a no-Imperium galaxy, no Ordo Xenos builds equivalent knowledge across millions of worlds simultaneously, cataloging infiltration signatures through centuries of inquisitorial work. The Votan, with mercantile relationships extending across multiple Xenos civilizations, with trading posts and mining operations scattered through the galaxy's resource-rich regions, accumulate equivalent knowledge through commerce and conflict. They become the closest functional equivalent to the Deathwatch's anti-Tyrannid role, operated on Votan commercial logic rather than imperial duty, and commercial logic, in this context, arrives at the same operational conclusion. A genestealer infestation represents an asset threat, a mining concession or trading partner whose population is being absorbed is eventually an asset that stops functioning and turns hostile. Eliminating the infestation protects the commercial relationship. The Votan bring overwhelming, concentrated firepower against a planet-scale biological security problem. The afflicted civilization recovers its functional population, and the Votan log the completed accounts in their Votan's permanent record, adjusting their threat signature library accordingly. The transaction is commercial. The outcome serves the galaxy's long-term immunity against Tyrannid absorption, regardless of the motivation producing it. The grudge debt mechanism is the element that makes this systematically more reliable than any hired mercenary force. Mercenaries stop when the contract price becomes insufficient. The Votans stop when the debt in the Votan's memory is satisfied, and the Votan's memory has extremely long patience. What this galaxy actually is. The instinct when removing the Imperium is to catalog what collapses. The list is long, and the losses are real. The Adeptus Astartes, the Guard, the Inquisition. 10,000 years of institutional doctrine for fighting every threat the galaxy generates. The Deathwatch, the Astronomicon as a navigational tool. The entire pipeline for detecting and countering chaos, Tyrannids, Xenos infiltration, and the 100 other catastrophes the setting generates routinely. The Imperium is genuinely load-bearing. Its absence creates real instability in every direction simultaneously. What grows in the space left behind is what the original thought experiment missed. Slaanesh is, by the mechanics traced above, at minimum severely diminished and most likely destroyed. One of the 4 Chaos Gods gone, and the Chaos Gods aren't individually interchangeable. Slaanesh was the specific entity that fed on Eldari soul energy as its primary sustenance, that provided the excess and sensation anchor to the Dark Pantheon's theological coordination, that produced the specific demonic hierarchy, the Demonettes, the Fiends, the Keeper of Secrets, whose absence reshapes every Chaos Warband that previously drew on that aesthetic. The remaining 3 gods operate without the Eldari soul harvest that fed Slaanesh constantly, without the traitor legions and demon primarchs that made human chaos warfare so specifically devastating, and without Slaanesh's specific contribution to the Pantheon's dynamics. It's still chaos. It's operating from a materially weaker position than the 41st millennium's actual configuration. The galaxy's spiritual layer distributes across hundreds of warp presences rather than concentrating in one throne. Gork and Mork absorb the orc species' enormous psychic output. Ynnead, fully awakened, changes the spiritual geography of the Eldari entirely. Every craft world that previously lived in the long shadow of Slaanesh's claim on their souls now exists under a different theological dispensation, one that includes an active god whose purpose is their protection rather than their consumption. Minor entities of varying capability dot the warp as residue from 10,000 years of Xenos civilizations, developing their own warp presences without the Imperium's homogenizing pressure, absorbing their psychic contributions into a single beacon. Chaos grows more slowly in this landscape, competes more for every point of nourishment, without a singular target to siege or a single beacon to corrupt. The Votan address Tyrannid infiltration commercially and systematically, with the institutional memory of every previous infiltration logged permanently in their ancestral archives. The Ynnari deal with Slaanesh's remnants through theological purpose. If Slaanesh is destroyed, but its demonic hierarchy persists in some diminished form, the Ynnari's entire reason for existing is the cleanup operation. Craft worlds with 10,000 years of uninterrupted development, coordinating with Drukhari no longer constrained by existential soul debt to a dead god, represent an Eldari psychic potential the actual 41st millennium never allowed them to develop. Somewhere in Chaos's rebuilt order of battle, a face the setting has never needed to describe holds the Warmaster role. An Eldari military genius whose psychic depth surpasses anything a human demon prince ever achieved, running coordinated campaigns against civilizations that have never developed counters to the specific tactical doctrine an Eldari commander carries. A Drukhari Archon who assessed the available patron options after Slaanesh's destruction, with the cold pragmatism that Kamara's political culture requires, walked into a chaos arrangement deliberately and commercially, and arrived with a city of billions and its industrial suffering infrastructure as the opening offer. An orc demon prince who broke through every statistical improbability the Wa implied and became something the warp theology of both chaos and orc religion has no existing framework to describe. The galaxy without the Imperium isn't weaker by simple subtraction. It's stranger, producing combinations the existing lore was never designed to describe because the Imperium's presence, for 10,000 years, foreclosed every scenario where these questions needed answering. A Watch-Captain from Talasa Prime, showing up at the critical moment on a crystal moon in 991M41, kept one of the 4 Chaos gods alive. 3 separate analytical threads, traced independently, arrive at the same conclusion. Remove the specific imperial institution that produced Artemis, and the kill chain runs without interruption. The original thought experiment asked who fills the power vacuum. The more interesting question was always what the power vacuum prevents from happening. The answer is a chaos god's death, and a galaxy that has to build everything that comes next without ever having needed to before. Without the models, without the doctrine, without the institutional memory for a situation that the Imperium's existence kept perpetually off the table. The piece this analysis genuinely can't resolve, because answering it requires dismantling the setting's founding assumption entirely, is which specific face holds the Warmaster role. An Eldari autarch serving Tzeentch, a Drukhari Archon pledged to Chaos Undivided, an Orc Demon Prince who crossed every probability threshold Gork and Mork implied and landed on the other side of everything. Which alien do you choose, and which Chaos God do they serve? The most convincing case in the comments is the one that would force Games Workshop to actually write it. Subscribe for more lore archaeology like this.